talking about the blue wall of silence. It's the culture of those in law enforcement protecting their own and the retaliation against those who don't fall in line. We just heard from one journalist with USA Today behind an eye-opening series of investigative reports. Now it's time to hear from a veteran law enforcement expert, retired LAPD Sergeant Dorsey, who's also an author with her latest book, The Confidence Chronicles, The Greatest Crime Story Never Told. Sergeant Dorsey, always great to have you on. You're with us live from Los Angeles. And I'm sure you heard some of what Daphne Direct, the USA Today reporter, shared with us in the previous segment about what she uncovered in her investigation. What's your reaction to her findings about this blue wall of silence and this culture of retaliation?
Well, listen, I'm not surprised by any of what was reported because I lived that life for 20 years as a Los Angeles Police Department officer. Very early in my career as a probationary officer, on 2 occasions, I had to report misconduct, first by a training officer who ultimately was suspended for 5 days because of the misconduct. And then a second time while still on probation, I had to report misconduct being committed by my immediate supervisor, a sergeant, who was ultimately transferred out of my division administratively as a disciplinary punishment for the misconduct that I reported. And so while there's a price to pay if you report, you got to make up your mind who you are and what you're going to tolerate on a police department.
So, Sergeant Dorsey, what happened to you when you made the complaints? I know you said that one officer was actually reassigned and moved somewhere else, but did you ever feel retaliation for speaking up or making complaints?
Absolutely. There was a backlash. I had partners who would sit in a police car with me for 8 hours and not say one word to me. They wouldn't say a thing to me from the time that we got in the car until we went in to watch. I mean, we'd get out of the car, we handled our radio calls. The citizens didn't know that there was strife in our car, but we would get back in the car and he didn't say nothing to me and I didn't say anything to him. It worked for me. And so I was just clear on who I was. I knew I was a black woman when I joined the department. Wasn't expecting to be treated the way that I was, but they let me know early on that I had to turtle up and I had to figure out a way to survive. First, to get through the police academy because they begin to indoctrinate you there with regards to backing your partner. That's code speak. And you hear that throughout your career. And backing your partner sometimes means physically backing them, making sure that you're there in the fight. If you get into one, oftentimes it means looking the other way when they engage in misconduct. And listen, any police officer who doesn't report misconduct, who acquiesces misconduct, is committing misconduct.
Well, that's interesting. So I was going to ask, how do officers learn to adhere to this blue wall of silence? You say that it was taught early on. Is it something that they're learning, like you said, from the beginning? Is it something that they learn by example over time?
You're told that formally, informally. You will see what happens when you don't adhere to that. Much like, I learned firsthand. Like I said, I had partners who wouldn't talk to me. When I got off probation, I was so happy because I thought, thank you, Jesus, I'm off probation. I'm not an at-will employee anymore. I'll go to my next division and I'll start anew, not knowing that the white officers who I worked with, who had issue with me because of what I had caused to happen on probation, had already telephoned ahead. They give you what they call a jacket and let my new division know that I was coming and what to expect and basically how to treat me. And so you learn very early that there's a price to pay. And listen, every police chief was once a police officer. They've grown up, if not on the department that they promote on, they've grown up in law enforcement and they understand that this kind of stuff happens. They understand that you will be retaliated against, that you'll be ostracized, and there's really nothing that can be done. We heard the other person speak about undesirable assignments, shift changes, freeway therapy, being assigned to a division far away from where you live. All of that can happen, and a watch commander can say it's just a matter of deployment. I needed to move you to graveyard, morning watch. It's not retaliation. How do you prove it?
Well, we discussed earlier that some departments are starting to look for solutions, starting by telling officers to speak up. Departments in Baltimore, New Orleans, and several other significant cities are starting to take steps in the right direction with more training focused on active bystander intervention. But a New York Times article noted that in one training session, Baltimore trainees were still asking questions like, am I really not going to get in trouble for intervening? And can stepping in keep me from getting promoted? If you see something, say something, sounds great in theory, but from your perspective, how can agencies overcome these valid concerns about retaliation?
This is not a training issue, and if they say that, they're being intellectually dishonest. As I said, every police chief was once a police officer, and they could stop retaliation for the good officers who report bad officers yesterday by creating an environment where it's conducive to someone to report misconduct and not be retaliated against. I went to the safe spot on LAPD after I had many years, about 18 on the department, to report a command staff officer who was sexually harassing me. And I went to the safe place, made that report, and before I could drive back to my division 2 miles away, my commanding officer knew I had already reported him. But because I had done what I thought was in my best interest, which was document, talk to other folks, make a whole lot of notes in case something ever needed to be presented to show what I'm saying is true, nothing happened to me. But I'm a rare, example of something not being done in retaliation to me for that report, but others don't have the same kind of outcome that I have. So police chiefs could stop this. They could go after the people who are retaliating against the good officers if they wanted to. But it's cultural, it's top down.
Sergeant Dorsey, we recently saw a guilty verdict in the case against the 3 officers who failed to intervene while Derek Chauvin murdered George Floyd. One, I want to get your take on whether the jury got it right, despite the 3 officers taking the stand, basically testifying that they were afraid to intervene, that they could be fired, that Derek Chauvin was a senior training officer that day, and also how that verdict might impact the culture of policing in this country.
Well, we'll have to see how the verdict impacts, because a verdict doesn't necessarily mean a penalty commensurate with the crime. We saw that in the sentencing, the slap on the hand that Kim Potter got. But to have 3 officers say somehow that I didn't stop Derek Chauvin and I didn't report what he was doing as wrongdoing is problematic, because once you get out of the police academy, you are a full-fledged 100% whole police officer, and you're responsible not only for your actions but that of your partner. A good partner would intervene.
All right, retired LAPD Sergeant Dorsey, thank you so much for joining us, and be sure to check out her book, The Confidence Chronicles, the greatest crime story never told. Appreciate you.